All right, welcome back, everybody. Whoever's watching, I'm sure I'll get a lot of views on this one. But I think I'm going to be working on gauges today. So I figured I'd pull everything out and show what I planned on doing and what I did before. On a 78 Regal, this is the instrument panel, basically cluster. Like it unbolts from the dash. It's a little time consuming to get to and get it out, but once you get it all out of there, it's not too bad. This is basically it. It's just this big frame here, and then it has this frame itself. I'm pretty sure this frame comes off, but all of this down in here is connected to it. It's like skeleton for that piece itself, and then you have this. In person, it's like a bluish color. Probably looks white on camera, but you have this tub here. This was for the factory gauges. This is the layout that I planned on going with. As you can see, I have these little green lights. I'm going to use these for turn signal indicators. These are 12 volt, just like indicator lights that I got off Amazon. Let's see. They run on 12 volts. I'm hoping they'll work. I've hooked them up to a DeWalt 20 volt battery, and just to see them light up. They light up. They're pretty bright. Seems like they're going to work pretty good. But I also have a red one here and a blue one, two green ones. I have some more, but those are the ones I plan on using. But this is probably going to be the layout that I go with for my gauges. This is kind of like what I had before when I used this piece of sheet metal. I cut this out very crudely years ago. That was probably like 6 years ago when I did this. And then these were all my dummy lights. This was for my choke cable, and then I had 3 small gauges, which are water, oil, and voltage that I have up here. These are different ones. These are a little bit bigger to match the size of my fuel gauge. They're 2-inch. So I'll have to have the holes this big instead of this big. I think these were like 1 3/4 or something like that inches. They were cheap. I didn't like them. They were analog gauges. I'm going with digital. So these are like the oil pressure gauge. It's a signal wire, not an oil line. I had an oil leak from the old one, from that little small one. It's an Equus gauge. I mean, they're good gauges. There's nothing wrong with them. They're cheap. They work well. It's just when you're going with mechanical readouts, you got to deal with oil in a pressure line. And nobody likes that. It's gross. They leak over time, and it was that hard plastic line, and it just kind of, it just fell apart over time. It took a few years, but it started falling apart. It just didn't seem to work well. Same with the water pressure one, or the water temp. That one, when it's mechanical, you got to run this long copper tube thing through the firewall, or however you do it, and put to your engine. I didn't want to do all that, so we're going all digital electrical readouts, so that way we can get rid of all that stuff. And that hole there is for a light. They got lights that go into the back of these things. But my gauges are, for the most part, these are all Equus except for the Speedo. The Speedo is an autometer because Equus does not make Speedos, I don't think, or at least the digital Speedos, because this is once again, this is a digital readout speedometer. So, but this is what I did before. This is what I had set up. It was real crude, man. I did it in like a day, and honestly, the cuts aren't straight. The shit's all janky. I mean, I didn't like how I had to cut it out. I didn't have the right tools to do it right, and I just kind of threw something together. That was for my washer fluid, headlights. This is the vent right here that we have here. I plan on still using that. I don't want to cover that up, but I'm going to do something different this time. This time I'm going to go with, I think I'm going to go with wood, and I chose this stuff right here. This is like a cedar project panel, plywood project panel that I got from Home Depot. It was like 20 bucks for a 2-foot by 4-foot sheet, and I cut these 3 pieces. I plan on doing it in 3 separate pieces here because of my gauge layout, because of how I'm doing these gauges. So for this piece, I'm going to put it on the far end. I'm going to have to cut the vent hole out, and I'm going to have to cut the washer fluid square out, and then drill a hole for the headlights and the dimmer. But this stuff looks really good, man. I've worked with it before, and it looks kind of pink in person. It looks almost pinkish, but once you put a clear finish on it, or I used poly, this poly satin urethane that I have right there. That's what I used, and it turned out, and it made it turn burgundy, and it looks this burgundy, which almost like this, like a darker burgundy. It looks beautiful. But I think that's what I'm going to go with. But I cut my 3 pieces out to fit inside of this. So let me pull these gauges out real quick. As you can see, I got a lot of wires to run, but I have a way around that because I wanted to change this. Oh yeah, and these don't have the covers on them because Missouri state law, I'm pretty sure, requires you to be street legal, a brake indicator light and a bright lights, high beam indicator light, and 2 turn signals, which I need to figure out what I'm going to do with those because, oh yeah, and I got my little Phytech screen that I was going to put in there because I'm going with Phytech. Now for that, the Phytech came with this clamp here, and it unscrews down here. Let's see if I can get that in better light. There's a screw. It's not in there now because this rod will slide out, and I think I'm going to try and integrate that somehow to come out of one of these holes somewhere, so it come out like right down here where this corner is, and I want it to come out and then come up and then over a little bit. That way I can put the screen in there, and it'll just kind of like hover because it'll be this clamp, and it'll probably be right about here, but I want it to hover about there and hold that so I can look at my air fuel ratios the whole time. And there's a couple other things you can look at with it. It's pretty neat. But yeah, so get this here, right there. But yeah, for the brake and the high beam indicators, I have the tops off of those. And I was gonna see, I took the old dummy light strip that goes here. It had like colored see-through like plexiglass type stuff, and you can see that. I tried to cut out the brake and high beam to go. See that? I mean, it's kind of, I don't like it. I didn't get it centered. It was real crude, man. I think I'm going to do something else. I think I'm going to look for some stickers or something to put on these little white caps, and then paint the white cap black, and then peel the sticker off and leave the white underneath it, and then use that inside of the cap, and then it'll have the 12-volt light behind it. They're not too bright, but I think they'll be bright enough to know that you'll know they're there, that's for sure. But back to this panel here, I'll set them in there, and I'm basically going to have to do this setup on this, but I did it in 3 different pieces for a reason. So I wanted to make it so I could service each piece differently, each section of the gauge cluster. So we have our washer fluid switch and a wiper switch here. So I wanted to make sure I could get to that, and then you have your headlight switch and rheostat for your dimmer here. And I wanted to make sure that I could get to those separate from the gauge cluster itself, because there's going to be a shit ton of wires behind this. And then on this one, I think I'm just going to use this for the 2 indicator lights, and then that 1 hole for this clamp to come out. I might do a couple more lights depending on what I want to use. If I wanted to add certain dummy lights, just for whatever. But that's for later. But yeah, it does look pretty good though. Because I took the whole, when I did it, I cut 1 whole piece that was I think this was about 18 inches, 18 and a half inches wide, and it was 10 inches tall. So, And all these pieces are square. I ended up measuring the tops and bottoms of them. They're square, but the trim, this whole piece here is not square. This is not square from GM factory. So it might not look right, or it might not look square in there. Like the edges here, when you get it all lined up, the gap looks wider in the middle than it does at the top, like this right here. When you have it mounted upright, it gets bigger, and then it's supposed to go back to smaller. But this piece likes to spread apart right here. It's kind of flexible, spread apart a little bit, and it'll pull back together. But I'm probably gonna end up with gaps, but I don't care, because this whole frame is not square, and there's no way to really make it square with the way it bolts into the car. So, but when I cut this piece out, it was a 10-inch tall by 18.5 inches wide, but I wanted to try and keep it almost seamless. So I cut the first piece at 4 inches wide, and then the next piece at 12.5 inches wide, and then the next one I think was like 2.25 or 2.5 inches, just to try and fill up the rest of that void there. But that way I can have my dummy lights serviceable here, and then have that clamp coming through down here, and then have my whole gauge cluster on this one single piece. So all these gauges here and the turn signal indicators I want to fit on this board, and then that way when I do all my stuff behind it, it'll have all the gauges behind it and all the wiring and stuff into this tub. And I plan on using this. This I pulled off of a Cobalt at the junkyard. It's basically like an engine control harness, and it's an 18-pin connector. 18 pins is perfect because, see, I don't know how well this is going to work. These are messages to myself. I do this a lot for reminders. This is the pinout for the gauge cluster. So, and it's, if you could see that without this terrible glare I got going on here, sorry. It's 18 pins. So this 18-pin connector here works great for this, because this is a push-in style that, if anybody knows them old clusters, it works on like a plastic, it's like a plastic sheeting that goes on the back of this tub right here. And this tub comes out. I plan on cutting all this shit out. All the guts in here I want to cut out and shave down flat. So it's just an empty tub, and I might cut some of this ribbing out here, and this stuff too, because I have to put the indicators in this spot where the old ones were. That's where the new ones are going to go. But I plan on cutting all the guts out of this and flattening it all out, with most likely that right there. But once I do that, all the wires and stuff will fit back in there. Then I'll have a connector that comes out of the back of this, or just sits back here. I won't know until I get it all wired up. And then the other end is going to be off of these wires for the car. Now this is a pinout test I found on Google. I just Google searched GBody instrument cluster. Well, I don't know. I didn't search for pinout. I searched instrument cluster connector. And this is the C1 connector, and this is just a general. It's like a general test for, I think it was a Malibu or something, but all the G-bodies are probably the same when it comes to this. Excuse me. So we'll just start with number one. The number one, it tells you that it's battery voltage to the fuel gauge, low fuel indicator, and it's pink and black. And if you go through here, you'll see there is pink for empty. It's really weird. Let's see, the pink is the actual sending unit wire for the fuel gauge. That's not for the low fuel. That's actually the pink. The solid pink is for the fuel gauge itself. That's like the empty full. That's the ohms reading. That's why it says 0 ohms full and 90 ohms is empty, or empty is 0 ohms and full is 90 ohms. Sorry. Number 8, you have a main ground. Number 7, you have indicator, battery voltage when signal's on, and it's a light blue wire. And then I think over here, yep, right hand, battery voltage with signal on, and it's a dark blue. And then you got light green for high beam indicator, got battery voltage to the cruise indicator, so, and that's a pink and black wire as well, kind of like this one down here for the low fuel. So those, I mean, if you wanted to use them, you would have to make sure 12, 13, and 14, they say are unused. I'm pretty sure there's wires there in my connector, because I remember when I pulled my connector out of the back of the cluster, because it comes in, it slides in right here. Like, so I took the plastic sheeting off. I don't know where it's at, but it goes in here, and it goes from here all along the back of this. It's just this plastic shit with these copper circuits. It's almost like a plastic circuit board, and it's flexible. And that connector snaps into here, and that's all your readings. Now, I had a huge problem with grounds on that whole thing, and I tried fixing it, and it burnt up all the grounds on it. So half my factory gauges didn't even work. I didn't have any lights. I didn't have a fuel gauge. I mean, half of it just didn't work. It was garbage. I mean, over time, it was no good. So I went and found this pinout, and I decided that I'm going to redo the gauges again, because the first time I did them, it was very crude, and I did a terrible job. But this time, I'm going to use this connector, and I'm going to hook up and use what wires that I need to use from this pinout, and find them. I'm going to make sure when I do it all in the car, I'm going to get all my wires up and make sure that they work how they're supposed to work, like my turn signals and the brake light indicator, high beam indicator, all that stuff. And then like fuel gauge, I'll make sure that they work and put out a signal, and then I will fix them to a side of this harness connector. And then that way, you know, when something goes wrong, I'll have an easier way to test shit. I won't have this push-in connector here. It'll be a factory GM style connector that's waterproof, and it has 18 wires in it already. Now these colors don't matter, but I probably am going to use these colors, like these wires, to a certain extent, and then connect my own wires to them. That way I don't have to open up this connector and like pull out pins and stuff and then repin stuff. It'll probably be easier just to use the wires that are here, at least parts of them, and I can just solder my connections into these existing wires and not have to get into this connector itself. So, but one of them is going to go to the car side, to the body side, using this pinout. I'll show it again in case you want to pause it and see it, anybody out there, or you can Google it and look for the same one I did. But I do plan on using this connector, and that way I can have a body side and have a gauge cluster side. That way I can take just this panel out. Now I was thinking about like these lights here, like having the indicator lights here, and so basically instead of, like, it wouldn't just be solely this piece for my gauges, you know, for that wiring and circuitry and stuff. It would be both of them. But I don't know if I'm going to run those indicator wires through this connector, you know, or if I do, maybe I'll go find some more connectors, like smaller connectors, like the radio ones, just get little 2-pin connectors or 3-pin connectors, and just run a couple of those off of the gauge cluster side. That way I can unplug this board from this board, you know, and then, you know, I still have a serviceable piece. But all these gauges should fit. I think these are 3-inch gauges for my speedo and tack, and then 2-inch gauges for everything else. But I put them all in the tub there, and they all seem to fit in the tub pretty well. But I'm gonna have to gut the tub. I'm gonna have to cut at least this section out, so I can fit the 3rd gauge right in the middle there, which will be my oil pressure most likely, because that's the most important gauge aside from fuel and speed and tack, which are the big ones, obviously. And then I'll have my water temp down here, and then voltage will be over here all by its lonesome, but it'll be fine. It'll be fine. I just got to gut that tub, and then once I gut the tub, I got to figure out how I'm going to mount these boards. And once I figure out how to mount the boards to where, like, they all sit flush, because I'm going to have to put spacers under this, because there's a distance between this and the top of the vent, which that that vent trim right here that goes around the turning part of the vent here, this frame here, is the distance from everything. It's the highest spot is that little framing. So I got to run the height of the whole cluster off of that to make it line up right. So this shouldn't be too hard. I'll probably just use some spacers of some sort. I might just use pieces of wood because I have a lot of this, and just drill holes in it and make my own little square spacers. But that'll be all in the process. I just figured I would show everybody what my plans are, and then here today I'm going to start doing a lot of this stuff. I've already curved down the corners, the 4 corners, for that piece there and that piece, so that way they're a little rounded. And I've already marked where I need to cut for my vent. I just got to mark, you know, how far across, and then make sure I do a straight cut down. I don't want this jagged crap. You know, like, it just, to me it looked tacky. I had to look at it every day when I drove this thing. This was my daily driver, so I had to look at this every single day and just remember that I did a terrible job. So that's gonna suck. I just don't want to do that again. I want to make it look really nice, which is why I'm going with this nice board here. And another thing I did notice is on that, I never had it before, but these are regular, like tiny peanut bulbs in the lights for these gauges. And I think this one might be LED. I'm not sure. And this one might be LED as well. Yeah, I think those two are both LED lights. I don't remember, but I do know on these, I can hook these lights up to the rheostat circuit on my headlight switch. So I'll be able to dim those lights with dash lights with my headlight switch, just like old factory style gauges. This one probably won't do it. The tack probably won't do it, and the Speedo, oh no, it does use a peanut bulb. It's got a little peanut bulb in there. So no, that'll be dimmable too. So, oh, that'll be awesome. That'll be cool. So I might get new bulbs for them just because, but as long as they're not LED, they're going to be dimmable. So yeah, hell yeah, that's going to be awesome. I am going to definitely do that. So, all right. Well, I think that just about sums it. That's what I plan on doing. Now, I'll probably have this done in like a week or two. It might take a little bit just because I want to finish this wood real nice. Like, I want to sand it real smooth. It's got a nice scratch on it there, but I want to sand it smooth and then clear it. And then I still need to, I wanted to bevel the edges, all along the edges, and I got to cut, you know, the hoop out here for the steering wheel, and then figure out where my gauges are going to be, where I'm going to put them to make them look nice. But once I figure that out, I do my wiring, and then it's just a battle from there. I mean, I won't film any of that stuff. I'm just going to show progress. So if you're wanting to see that kind of stuff, I'm sorry. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. But if you're still watching, thanks for watching the whole way through. That's what I plan on doing. Get rid of old shit, put really nice wood in there, and then I also plan on doing the radio square the same way. So, but this will just be how I do it. If you like it, cool. Hit me up, comment. Until then, I'll see you guys next time.